and then we will get started. Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Caraballo. I am the Managing Director of Research here at the National Endowment for Financial Education, or NEFE for short. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with NEFE, we are the independent, centralizing voice providing leadership, research, and collaboration to advance financial well-being by championing effective financial education. I am so excited to present this webinar topic to all of you today: best practices for reading and writing manuscripts. This is for both researchers as well as consumers of research. And so for the next 45 minutes or so, we will do a deep dive into the topic with our special guest here, Dr. Carly Urban, after which I will have just a quick few announcements to give you all, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A afterwards. For today's webinar, for the Q&A, we will have to use the raised hand function, and then you will unmute yourself for that portion. So I apologize ahead of time for the quirkiness that might introduce, but we'll figure it out together. So thank you all for being here, and let's just get started.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. It's fun to just see my face up on the slide. That's not weird at all. It's so fun to see like names that I know and names that I don't know in here. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this. I kind of consider myself a little bit more at the junction of having worked with policymakers a lot and being an intense academic, where I really love translating research. And I've also spent a lot of time writing literature reviews, both in and out of discipline, for more policy-based audiences. So this is going to be kind of like a two-prong little strategy here, where I'm going to try to tell people, or based on my experiences, what the best practices are for having the right content in academic style papers, manuscripts, reports, things like that, so that policymakers can use that information and don't just take your paper and kind of throw it to the side, like, I'm never going to understand this. And then at the same time, I'm going to talk to the practitioners, the policymakers, that space, about how to actually read an academic paper, right? And this is not going to be you read it from head to tail. That's not in anyone's best interest. So kind of doing both of those at the same time, because they're so related that it seemed almost ridiculous to do this for two different audiences. And it would be great to have a little bit of interface at the end between the practitioners and the academics. I will steal a term from Jason Fichtner, who used to be pretty high up in the Social Security Administration, where he would call himself a pracademic. And I think that that's my favorite term ever. So.
And if you don't mind, Carly, I'd love to do a quick introduction of you. I know pretty much everyone probably already knows who you are, but just in case, this is Dr. Carly Urban. She's a professor of economics at Montana State University, a research fellow at the Institute for Labor Economics, and also a fellow at the TIA Institute. She holds an MA and a PhD in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a BA in Economics and International Affairs from the George Washington University. Dr. Urban has studied financial education for the last 10 years, focusing predominantly on the effectiveness of personal finance instruction in high schools. And she was a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Board and also at the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where she helped the agency determine which financial education programs are the most effective for our youth. Dr. Urban's research has been published in top peer-reviewed journals in economics and in finance, and her work has also been covered by leading news outlets, which includes NPR, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and so many others, including local news outlets. Dr. Urban is also a former and current grantee here at NEFE, and we're so excited and proud to be able to work with her. Not only is she a great academic, but for anyone who's ever met her, she's an amazingly personable and fun person to be around. So thank you so much, Carly, for being a part of this discussion, and the floor is all yours.
It's funny, I feel like my family would not call me fun, but for this group, maybe. Uh, so we wanted to make this talk a little bit more relevant, not just for economists, which is my background discipline, but also for lots of fields that are working in the financial education space. There's some great research lately suggesting that the desk rejection rate across lots of different fields, including general sciences, econ, all these other groups, on average is 69%. So lots of papers are getting to journals and instantly getting desk rejected. It takes a long time to publish good research, and the peer review process is slow. In some fields, it's much slower than others. In econ, sometimes we see like 7-year publication lags where people are just slogging through. And we really need to get our research out into the world before then, so policymakers, practitioners can take action. And we also need to be able to write papers where, other fields are actually going to understand our papers in some way. They don't have to understand everything, but we really want to kind of have some like transparency to move this financial education field forward. So if we know that it's not just going to hit a journal right away, we need like manuscripts and early drafts that are going to be readable. Okay. So what are our goals for today? So the first thing we want to do is just better communicate across fields within the financial education research world. I think every field within FinEd has been frustrated at some point for not being cited or really taken seriously or read widely, or not having their evidence come to the forefront when other fields are talking about them. And I think a lot of this disconnect is just based on the languages and the communication that we have. So a lot of my, again, my thoughts are going to be based on times when I've had to put together lit reviews across fields and what I would like to see in different things. I'm sure someone from not econ would say something a little bit different in terms of like what they would like to see in papers. But I'm going to kind of like extrapolate away from that, almost think of this more as like how an initial abstract is for a medical journal where many people can kind of understand that. We also want to have the highest possible impact of papers in the policy and practitioner sphere so that policymakers, practitioners are using all of this evidence that we're, like working so hard to write up and spending years upon years and getting rejected at journals to really put together. There's good information in all of these papers. So I want to be really clear that like we get all of these papers written in a way that policymakers and practitioners can actually use them. And then I want policymakers and practitioners to understand how to read academic papers, what they should and shouldn't be looking at. This shouldn't take them that long. And how to actually determine some level of validity. And maybe validity isn't even the right answer here. Maybe it's more relevance. So for researchers, what do you want the world to learn from your papers? And then how do we get the world to actually learn that? And for research consumers, what do you want to learn about? What are you looking for? And does that paper teach you something about your specific question or mission or programs in a way that you can use it to kind of figure out what you're going to do next? So that's a big ask and we don't have that much time. So I thought we would go through just some different parts of the paper, and I'm going to start this, even though it's kind of set up a little bit different. I'm going to start really with the research consumer in a lot of these cases, and then tell you what to do as the researcher. So the first thing, if you're a research consumer, what you should do is read the abstract. Okay. Straight to the abstract seems obvious. Okay. And in that abstract, researcher, you better be telling them what your question is, how you do it, what your setting is, and what your finding is. So those 4 things are going to be the most important things you say. I know sometimes in the academic world, we like to kind of keep our setting under the table a little bit, especially if it's very niche, just because we want we want to get published, right? So we want everything to seem like it has broader implications. But from a practitioner's point of view, and even from other researchers across other fields' point of view, they want to know your setting right away so that they can see if it's something very relevant to what they're doing. Is it in the developing world? Is it in the US? Is it in only one classroom in rural Kansas? Like, what is that setting? What is the year of that setting? Right. So the more you can say specifically about that setting, really in one sentence in an abstract, the better your paper, the more likely your paper is to actually be cited, because someone's then not going to have to dig through your entire paper and try to figure out exactly what you did. Okay. So the best line of defense is the abstract. Okay. So when you're writing, this should be something you spend a ton of time on. Now, if you're reading an abstract, the first things you should be asking yourself are, does this research question even apply to what I do, right? Maybe this is about financial education in elementary school and you work with older adults. Can we even take that away, right? If the researcher was just saying, the question is, does financial education work? And we do an experiment to figure it out, and yes, it does, then that tells the research consumer absolutely nothing. Right? That's just like this very abstract, broad thing. But if you say we do an experiment in rural Kansas among 1,000 elementary school students, and this is our finding, and we looked at these specific years, then the research consumer can be like, yeah, that is applicable, or not really. We're not really interested in people that young. Okay. So if it's not applicable, the good news is you don't have to read anymore. You're done. Okay. You can move on to a different paper, or you can go read something else or just take a nap. The second thing I always say to look for right away in the abstract is the method. And this doesn't have to be perfect by any means. But you want to kind of look for words like randomized or experiment or evaluation, quasi-experiment, lots of different method words here that are kind of my buzzwords. But the most important thing, if you don't see one of those, is something along the lines of variation from. So where is the variation coming from in the question that they're asking? And there's always the possibility that it's just a descriptive paper trying to tell you what the baseline education level is of some group or something like that. And then you don't really need to look for those. You're just looking at your sample and like trying to understand what average rates are, and that's totally fine. But if you don't really know where the variation is coming from and something is claiming to have a causal interpretation, then you should kind of have an eyebrow lifted like, is this going to make sense? And then you have to keep reading, unfortunately. And then finally, in addition to the question being applicable, ask yourself if the setting is applicable. And again, if not, let's say that you're looking at a paper that says, what is the effect of financial education on stock market participation? And the experiment is in, let's say, a completely different country. Let's say it is in Saudi Arabia, because there is a paper looking at that. Then I would say, if that's your specific question, and the question is almost exactly the same for the same type of population, like age group, then I would say you need a really strong method to be convinced that your results will be similar. If the setting isn't exactly applicable, if it's a different country again, then it might still tell you something. Can it relate back to your setting in some way? Then maybe make that case. But if you've already kind of raised your eyebrow about the methods and you're not entirely sure of the how, or the sample is a little bit weird, then you probably don't need to keep reading. It's probably not going to be the most valuable evidence for you. And again, you get to take that amazing nap. Now, if the setting is exactly what you want, keep reading. Okay. I'm going to give you an example of one of the best abstracts I've seen recently. This is published in the recent Journal of Financial Literacy and Wellbeing. And in this paper, I can't think of I literally could not find a better abstract. So this paper studies whether school-based financial education has spillover effects from children to parents. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward research question. They say leveraging data from a large-scale experiment with public high schools in Peru. So you know the context right away, you know public high schools, and credit bureau records on the parents of the youth that were targeted. This study measures the impact of providing personal finance lessons during secondary school on parental financial behavior. So they're seeing if the financial education affects the parents. Financial education lessons in the school yield limited average spillover effects, but they lead to sizable effects on parental financial behavior within disadvantaged households. So these are all of the findings. We know how they're doing it. We know that there's a randomized experiment. It's a large-scale experiment. It's public high schools. It's in Peru. And we're looking at how financial education affects parents. And we know that there's no average effect. So overall, there's not an effect. But for parents of children in disadvantaged households, we are seeing this positive effect. Then she goes on to quantify the effect. So among parents from poorer households, the treatment reduces default probability by 26%, increases credit scores by 5%, and increases current debt levels by 40%. So lots of effects on financial behaviors. And the treatment actually has stronger effects among the parents of daughters. They tell you it's less the parents of boys. So there's a lot of information in here. Arguably, this is slightly longer of an abstract than what some other journals allow you. But even if we got rid of the exact numbers and we deleted everything from among beyond, I would still know the basic takeaway of the paper. And the one thing I would say that's missing is the years that they're studying, right? We don't know if this is during the pandemic, pre-pandemic, some other time. But overall, this is pretty much gold standard in, I think, how to write an abstract. Great. Okay, so let's say we get past the abstract. Now you are a practitioner. If the researcher has done their job, the intro will be the only thing you have to read. So you got past the abstract, you're like, yeah, I'm interested. Hopefully they did their job and you only have to read the introduction. So what is your question? Again, research questions should be front and center. How do you build on past work? This will also, little tidbit here, give the practitioner or policymaker a quick lens into what's already been done so that they then don't have to go looking for lots of other papers. How do you answer it? So again, how you do it, but not in the very detailed sense as in field specific. You want this to be a little bit more understandable to a broader audience. So where your variation's coming from, your specific setting, your years, your geography, your data. When you put your sample size in here, that's really important. So is this observational data or is it survey data? The type of data you're using and how many observations you have. Again, a couple lines, you don't need much, but something explaining your variation and your methods for any audience. And I think any of us can do this. And this is where we often, as researchers, get lazy and just get into our field jargon. And our field jargon will come, but we also need to be able to say where our variation is coming from. Maybe it's state policies, maybe it's an experiment, maybe it's just some people happen to have had more levels of education than others or something like that. However you do it, just make sure that someone out of field can understand. And then what do you find? That's really important. What is the effectiveness? What is the cost? What is the overall effect in terms of policy impact? And if all of this is there, then the research consumer is going to be able to really pick this up easily. The one thing that they're maybe going to spend a little bit less time on, but you need to have in order to have this cross-field symmetry are your main limitations. Nobody likes to put them front and center in your intro, but it's going to make your entire overall impact of your paper exponentially higher, especially if you can explain this in both your field and cross fields, what you would like to have fixed, right? None of our research is without limitations, but we have to actually be really transparent about what they are. Okay, I'm talking really fast because I'm getting so excited. You can tell I like writing papers. Okay, so now let's say that you are the practitioner who is consuming research. I want you to first, again, if it wasn't in the abstract, consider that detailed setting. Does it even apply to what you're doing? Think about the sample size, especially if they have it in there. Is it really tiny? Maybe you're doing qualitative work and that's fine. It should be tiny then. You're just reading about interviews. If someone is doing empirical work that is supposed to be causal in nature, then they need a bigger sample. It's as simple as that. Try to be really careful about that. Consider the methods. Can you understand what comparison the authors are making? And I think this is where, when I talk to practitioners, they read some papers and they're like, oh God, like, I don't understand this. I'm not smart. I will turn that every time and say, it's not you, it's them. Because if you don't understand the method, it was not explained well, right? And I get that there are some methods that are really complicated, but almost everything can be boiled down to a couple sentences of explanation or like at least a paragraph where you can say what's happening under the hood. And it's never that complicated. I think medical journals actually do a really good job of this because their abstracts are so standalone and people have to, right? You have to, if you're submitting, your reviewers look different. They're really widely across discipline. And I think as a whole, we can do better as researchers on this front. But if you are a research consumer and you don't get the methods, it's not you. Just remember that. Read the limitations. Are they a pill too big to swallow? If you can't find these here, you're gonna have to keep looking. Some of the limitations of papers are huge and they make things really not relevant directly right away to policymakers. And that's fine. That's the academic world. We're pushing an envelope further. That doesn't necessarily mean that things are relevant for you. So, maybe the links that are being made and the assumptions that some authors are going to have to make aren't ones that are going to make you personally believe the results. And that's not a problem. That just means that that paper does not have immediate policy relevance for you. Cool. So again, if this is done right, no one needs to read beyond the intro, no cross-field work, no policymaker additional work. Unless you're really, really interested more in the specific setting. So let's say you're a practitioner and you read the intro and you're like, got the takeaways. I understand this, what they're doing, who they're comparing. I understand the intervention a little bit. You might also want to know more about the intervention, right? What specifically was happening, especially in terms of financial education? Like, what did these lessons look like? What did the tests look like? What did the outcomes look like? Then you might want to just know a little bit more. If on the other hand, the intro doesn't tell you about limitations or validity or any of the how, unfortunately, you're going to need to keep reading. Okay. So this is where things, abstract intro, okay, you're probably thinking like, no crap, Carly, like this is how you read a paper. This is where I would say now you jump to the conclusion, okay? Unless you're like, hey, that intro was perfect. I want to know more details. I want to know more meat. I would say you jump straight to the conclusion. So if you're a researcher and you're writing an academic paper, you will often think of the conclusion as this like completely afterthought thing that you throw together. But that would probably be like the biggest missed opportunity you have. So what you should do is just review the findings. You don't need to get back into your methods, but explain the finding really clearly. So this is where you might do a back of the envelope calculation to figure out exactly how big this is and how many people your policy affected. What are the clear takeaways for policymakers? I would say always have some policy implications if you can, but never overstate them. So this should be where you as an academic get to say all you want to say with as much nuance as you want. You don't need to have this like big home run. It may only be some descriptive statistics. Like, we learned that actually way more people in this part of the country are financially capable than we expected them to be based on this measure, right? It's fine. It should be super honest though. So then if you're a research consumer, I would say read the conclusion. Again, if you've gotten past the abstract and intro and still think the paper is worthwhile for what you're doing, and if the conclusion says something that, like, the paper definitively answers something, then skip this section. Don't actually read it. If you're getting like a very nuanced policy take, then that's a great thing. See if those takes pass your smell test, because you talk to people on the ground regularly. You interact with people getting financial education. You are the ones in the hot seat constantly talking to normal people. So I would say, see if that kind of jives with what you're thinking and what you've seen in your experience. And if you think that something doesn't like smell right, then you're probably gonna have to look more into the methods and try to figure out a little bit why. Or this is where I would also say, if you think something is off, email a researcher. You can email that researcher, you can email me. I get these emails constantly, like, what do you think of this paper? Or like, this part seems weird to me. Does it seem weird to you? Sometimes I'll get them in a way that like definitely does not prime me for what the practitioner thought was the problem. They're just like, is there a problem with this? And then when I write back, they're like, that's exactly what I was thinking. Okay, that makes me feel better because I've had this experience with people in my setting. So yeah, you're probably not wrong. Don't gaslight yourself here. Okay. Now, if you've gotten again through those sections and you're still interested, or you got through the intro and you're like, I'm not really sure if this is valid, the next section I would tell you to go to is the data section. So the researcher, you should always say where the data come from, what years are covered, what geography, how big are the samples, how many observations are in the treatment group if you have that versus the control group. Never ever point to another paper to say, like, for more on the data, see this, because nobody wants that. Nobody wants to have to go to another paper. You can include a data appendix that's going to explain exactly how the data were collected or constructed. If that data set that whole data section gets way too long, and then somebody can get into the weeds, but a practitioner doesn't have to, someone out of field doesn't have to. You want this to be tight, but you don't want any of those prime important things missing. Again, if you're a consumer, you want to see how big the data set is. Do you have a lot of observations? What kind of sample do they cover? Is this a low income population? Is it college students? Is it young people? Is it older adults? Is it in the US? Is it in a specific place in the US? Is it in the developing world? What are the years? So again, if this was not in the intro and very obvious, which it should be, but sometimes is not, then you're just basically looking at the data section for the things that you should already know, but don't yet know, right? The things where you're like, is this sample worth my energy to read this? And if it's not, you're done, right? You don't have to read anymore. If it's extremely relevant, then you're gonna have to keep going. Okay. Now, there are words in a data section for me that raise alarm bells. One is a convenience sample. Sometimes these are more common in qualitative work. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, for quantitative work, if you're just sampling people where they are, you really can't generalize to a greater setting in almost any circumstance. So unless you are interested in that exact convenience sample of that very specific group of people that someone else has already found, it's never going to be the same result if you were to pick up this study and put it into yours. Also, anyone who conducts their own survey needs a little bit more scrutiny. So for example, if you have a survey that's done on a platform where people already are, with a great example being any polarized news source, or any like financial education platforms website, because those people have already gone there, they're going to be a very different population than people who, are just in the general population. So these are things that you should definitely be worried about. You also should check, if you are a practitioner or I guess an out of field academic, when sample sizes start out very high and then have a follow-up and really drop off a lot, and there's a lot of attrition, this needs a ton more attention. And I would say if you are not an academic, if you are a practitioner, this is when you call in help to see if they've done enough. Like you don't need to learn how to do everything in terms of methods, but I would say like send an email at that point. Just say like, hey, this is weird, or like, should I be worried about this? I get those emails a lot. And sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes it's absolutely. Cool. Okay, so I think no practitioner ever needs to read a technical section. So what I've done, given that, again, I am an academic and I write peer-reviewed papers, is I make these sections standalone and easily skippable. So if I have a theory section, then no one ever has to read the theory section if they don't want to, right? It's not embedding other important information. Same thing with like a lit review, unless it's like a basic, what's already been done, that I can put into an intro. I would put that by itself. So a research consumer, again, wouldn't have to deal with that. I like to be super technical and field specific and jargony in those sections and not have any other kind of like flowy language. So those are the places to kind of like really dig in there. Maybe I will always have a paragraph at the opening of my methods section that gives the overall intuition for the methods you use that anyone can understand. So for example, using variation in state required financial education in high school, before and after these requirements went into place. I study the effects of these mandates on youth behaviors or something like that. So something that's very broad and understandable and says exactly where the variation comes from before I get into any equations. Okay, so that means that if you are a practitioner, you get to skip any sections called theory, always. Never look at them. Pretend they're not there. Don't even print them if you're a printer. Skip any section that would be called a review of the literature, lit review, something like that. And my controversial opinion, others may disagree. Well, other than reading that opening paragraph, you can also skip the methods section. Skip the results section. This is something I rarely want to have to read. If I am reviewing other research, I will read it when I have to. But if everything is put where it should be in the intro and the conclusion, you should not have to read someone's full drawn out version of their results. I personally like to look at results through the table, and then occasionally we'll look at the words around them, but I think they're the most boring sections to read. Again, this is maybe controversial, but if I'm saying that practitioners don't have that much time to just be reading our papers all day, they should never have to read the results sections. They're too long, and there are too many different sets of results where we're like proving robustness, and we're saying like, hey, now we changed the sample a little bit this way, and here's a table with 7 different coefficients where we just changed one small thing, and they don't know why or understand, like, they shouldn't have to understand why or whether or not it's important. They should just know what the main takeaway is based on your body of evidence, right? We don't want to put them through that. And every field obviously is going to have very different types of standards for robustness checks and things like that. I thought this was a good example of well-explained methods, opening paragraph, and this is from Daniel Mangram's Journal of Financial Economics recent publication on the effects of financial education in high school on student loan repayment. So you'll see right away, he says what he's estimating. So I estimate the causal effect of personal finance education mandates on federal student loan repayment performance by relating the change in the share of each university cohort that is bound by these mandates, okay? So he's telling you exactly like how he's doing it. The variation in the share of each cohort bound by mandates is driven primarily by adoption of state mandates, but is augmented by the state shares of incoming cohorts. So you know right away that there's two sources of variation. One is that students live in the states where personal finance mandates become binding, right? So they actually have to take personal finance prior to graduating from high school. And then the second one is coming from the fact that at some universities, there are more in-state versus out-of-state students, or there are more students from each state. Okay, so this is exactly what he's explaining, and kind of goes through this in depth, and then has a beautiful little graphic to accompany it that will it's not very it's a little grainy, but that's okay. You'll see the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, after Tennessee put their mandate into place. Lots of students at that school were subject to the mandate because lots of students go to school in Tennessee come from Tennessee that go to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, right? It's mostly in-state students. Now, Vanderbilt, on the other side of that, has a lot of Tennessee students, but not nearly as many. So after that mandate went into place, you'll see that that does jump up, but not nearly by as much. And actually, a lot of students were required in earlier years. You see, like in 2007 at Vanderbilt, to have a personal finance class because they're coming from different states, right? So other states implemented that requirement in 2007, 2008, and we see the tick up before Tennessee adopts, right? So you can kind of see the method really clearly just in one figure in this little thought experiment, but he's using these two sources of variation, the new mandates and the fraction of students that are in versus out of state versus from all different states at these different universities. Okay. Now, I've said this a few times, but I think just having this, having your assumptions stated explicitly is important. And actually, this is something I always search for. I do a control F of ASSUM to try to get any assumption someone says in their paper. And I can't even tell you how many times that comes up with absolutely nothing, especially in the fin ed world. So what are your limitations? What are your assumptions? Saying exactly what is required of your methods is important in order to have this cross-field impact. And we want our work to be cited. I think the more I see assumptions, the more I trust researchers. Putting all of our baggage out there is a good thing. Let's just be really clear about it. And then if you're a research consumer and you search for assumptions, you're probably not going to fully understand them. If something seems like a bridge too far, really obviously, then maybe just contact a researcher. If you see something and you're like, I wouldn't maybe spend as much time on this looking for the assumptions. So if we go back to the Mangrum paper, he says straight up, it should also be true that personal finance mandates don't change student choice of universities. So that is a big assumption, right? Luckily, it's a testable assumption. So he does show evidence for this. Otherwise, then he gets into this could be a problem, right? So here is an assumption I have to make for this model to hold. Probably not an issue. Okay. And then finally, some type of limitations. What does your research not say? So for example, these results are not causal is a really good thing to say in your intro. If they're not, that's totally fine. We always say that correlations are much better than anecdotes. So if you don't have a correlation paper out there, then a policymaker is sometimes making a decision based on what happened to their aunt. And that's not, we'd rather have correlations, we'd rather have qualitative work, we'd rather have any larger scale evidence than someone's relative. So be honest about what you have. Like any evidence is better than no evidence, but be really honest about what you can't do. So that lets our field grow. Then we can move maybe from correlations to causality in some cases, or bigger samples or different samples. But there's still stuff to learn. And then finally, for a research consumer, I think this is really important, and NEFE's done a great job with this. So when we see these limitations, maybe that says it's time to like fund some new research. Like, what needs to happen next? If the more we're honest about our limitations, the more others out there in this space can help academics out and say like, oh yeah, this seems really important. We need to know this. How can we help you? How can we partner? How can we get you better data? How can we like work together to make financial education more effective, right? How can we actually do this? Okay. This is more like a little piece of advice for the researcher. Have someone out of field read your paper. See if they can take kind of this template, this like, do a basic read and ask them to explain back to you in very like easy terms, almost like an extension agent would, or something like, what did they do? What did they find? What were the takeaways? And did they buy it? Right? Because if they don't buy it, it might just be that they don't really know what you're doing. And then maybe that's on you for not explaining it well. But the better we can do with this like iterative communication process, the better the whole field is going to be. Right. And this isn't just financial education. This is like other social sciences, other policy spaces where there are lots of different fields talking to each other. If you are a research consumer and you're like, how do I help with that? Give us more space for interdisciplinary research to talk more about our findings. I think we can only benefit from really just like talking more and understanding what each other are doing, and not just like, I found this. Like, okay, what was your intervention? What were you doing? What was your sample? Tell me about where your variation was coming from. Like, what was going on? And the more we can have that dialogue, the more we can all write papers that we're actually citing and we're sending around to policymakers, and we're not like looking at papers after the fact, after they've been out for a while, and then backhand saying like, does this make sense or not? And you saying like, not really, or things like that. We can improve more on the front end and be a lot more efficient. Okay. Last point here is that one excellent graphic goes a long way. So the best thing you can do is make some obvious takeaway come out in one figure and get that out to people. And if you're a research consumer and you look for that figure or some results or trends that, you have this main takeaway, it's obvious. You see one of these tables or figures and you're like, whoa, this is really helpful for me. Hopefully that's always the first figure. Guilty. This is an example from one of my papers. This is not the first figure. The first figure was also pretty cool though. So in our JFE paper from 2022, when we did our meta-analysis update of all randomized controlled trials, we had one paper where we looked at the overall effects of one figure where we looked at the effects of financial education across all these different domains. And you'll see that the effect size is the biggest for financial knowledge. And we see positive effects for credit and budgeting and saving, a little bit less so for insurance. And then the remittance outcome is very noisy, common outcome in developing countries. But this graph was kind of our big circulated takeaway of, what does financial education do to financial behaviors? And it seems pretty straightforward. We had a lot more notes underneath it in the main figure, but yeah, it's something that can just be easily digested. Cool. So that's a lot from me. Feel free to send your questions or comments, disagreements.
Yes, wow. Thank you again, Carly. This was not only just important and timely, but it was just great to hear about all of this. So thank you again for lending us your expertise today. I'd just like to make a couple of announcements while people are either sending us some questions via email. I apologize for the extra step with that, but you can also use the hand raise function here in Zoom if you prefer. Probably a little bit easier. I will be monitoring that, and then I will ask you to unmute so that you can ask your question. So, just a couple of things for everyone. Our 2024 Financial Education, Innovation, and Impact Summit, or the FEII Summit, will be held this October from the 8th to the 10th here in our headquarters in Denver. Registration for the summit is now open. So to register, I ask please visit Financial Education Summit. That's all one word. Again, that's Financial Education Summit.com. Seats are limited, so I do urge you to register as soon as you possibly can. And lastly, I also ask that you please visit NEFE.org. That's NEFE.org in order to learn more about all the work that we are doing. We also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to learn more about all of our initiatives. And we are also on several social media channels, including Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Medium, YouTube, and Instagram. Our engagement team is pretty busy. We'll also have more webinars this year from the research department, so look out for those through our announcements in our newsletters as well as our social channels. Okay, so let's get to the Q&A. I don't see any hands raised, but Michael, if you are here and you can hear me. Aha, there we are, Michael. I think we do have some questions, so I will ask you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Carly. Fantastic presentation. I will just say the one question I've gotten so far is if you're okay with us sharing the slides with folks that registered if they request.
100%.
Excellent. So then I will abuse this privilege that I have because I have a question.
Yes.
So this is actually very relevant to the last slide that you showed from your and Tim's meta-analysis paper. So I wanted to ask a question about how you can encourage particularly consumers to evaluate conversations about effect size and statistical significance. You know, step above, you know, your sort of lay consumer. Lots of folks that we work with in this field are, I'm sure, quite familiar with interpreting statistical significance, but effect sizes sometimes can be a little bit more difficult to understand, especially because there's a lot of analyses in our field that use, I guess you maybe would say, non-standard ways of evaluating, right, the impact of different interventions. I'm thinking specifically of, like, you know, if you ever look at a paper that, you know, just reports to you the results for a logistic regression, you know, this type of thing is really challenging to communicate to people, even if you've got the stars and someone's like, okay, well, that's a significant result, so I guess that's good to go. So that's sort of the first question, is rules of thumb for thinking about effect sizes and statistical significance. You might even just tell, I guess, maybe folks just a little bit more about what's going on specifically in this graph, because I agree this is, I think, a very useful graph to sort of communicate that. And then the second related question is, we also know that in good faith efforts, I think oftentimes to try to make things a little bit more tangible, we also get a lot of research in our field that will project, right, or impute sort of different types of results on other things of interest, right, by saying, okay, well, if, for instance, we know that the effect of increased financial literacy on credit outcomes is X, then in some cases we might see that, or we might assume that, you know, people might save X amount of money over time. How can people be sure to appropriately evaluate claims like that? What are some things that they can look out for? Some assumptions that maybe are hidden that they need to identify, you know, stuff along those lines. But thanks so much for such a great presentation. And to the rest of folks, please feel free to continue to email me some questions if you like.
Okay, so I feel like that is the most, like, I'm taking the bait on that one totally. I feel like this might get ugly, but that's fine. Okay, so first I'm going to start simple with effect sizes. So when we're thinking about, whenever you're, as a researcher, thinking about effect sizes, and maybe, you know, your field is making you do a logistic regression in a way where you have to report odds ratios, which don't always like directly translate into what we want in terms of like how many people are affected, you might have to do an extra step and look at something like a marginal effect and then interpret it, right? Is it big? Is it small? And to figure that out, and as an example in this paper, we were looking at standardized outcomes. So these are effect sizes. Obviously, you all know what G means, right? I mean, these are based on standard deviations in all of these different outcomes. So we standardized everything. We looked at these in terms of standard deviation gains. And this is something that's really common to do in the education world at large. So not only did we standardize, we said 0.2 of a standard deviation for financial knowledge. Again, practitioners have no idea what the heck that means. So what we did is then we went to other education scholars who have really clear benchmarks for what is a big effect of an educational intervention. So compared to lots of other math and science and reading and anti-smoking and lots of other education and information interventions. And we figured out that these are like medium to large size effects. So it's really nice to be able to call it that and then compare it to other things. So the effects were really similar to the effects of interventions based on math and reading. So we were able to make those comparisons in a way that other people could understand. And then finally, we went through some of the bigger randomized control trials. So for example, the one Veronica Frazhenko did in Peru, and we actually did a full back of the envelope calculation of approximately how much it costs per student and approximately what those gains were. And we actually did that for our entire sample as well. We were able to get like a clearer dollar measure for some of the studies. But then we were able to use that again for this benchmark method in educational interventions and say that, our effects were medium to large, our costs were low per pupil in the financial education space. So we spent probably weeks trying to understand the whole cost side, how big our effects were. We did it in all different ways, and it probably was only a few lines in the paper, which just feels like a very unsatisfying and something that can just kind of go away. But at the same time, it's the most important thing that we do. So in that capacity, it's really important. In some of my other work on financial education, state mandates, and credit reports, when we looked at our improved credit scores and our reduced delinquencies, we figured out exactly how many people in each state approximately were less likely to be 90 days or more behind by age 22. And that's a really concrete number, right? Like how many young people is this affecting? And that's something that policymakers can take and try to understand better. So your primary model might not give you a coefficient that is directly interpretable in a way that other people can assess it, and your field might make you have that complicated model. Now you can run another model that's a little bit simpler and has a different takeaway, or you're getting your marginal effects from your logit, and then you're like translating it into a real effect. But if you don't do that last step, your paper will have 1/100th of the impact, if that. So it's worth it, but it's time consuming. Now, in terms of projections, this is probably one of the things that I think at times keeps me up at night. Because people do at times say like, well, if this holds, then this holds, then this also holds. So like we have this improvement in credit scores, and then let's say that people buy insurance cheaper, and then let's say that this then turns into more money in someone's retirement account, and then this turns into this, and then we're going to put a dollar value on it. I would say there are two things that make me wary. One, if you don't know exactly the numbers that that researcher took to get from point A to point B to point C, then you should definitely have alarm bells going off like crazy, right? If that is not 100% transparent, then something is not good. The other thing is, and this might sound a little bit more, maybe like a little bit weirder, but if something works out to be a perfectly round number in like $100,000 or like some very like $1 million, some very like media friendly number, I'm always a little bit like, like how did they get there? And that for me throws up an eyebrow and makes me spend a little bit more time thinking about it and going through each of the assumptions. Because I mean, there could be assumptions that work that say like, okay, if we project this change in credit scores, it should change dollars in your pocket by this much. And maybe there is a really clear way to link that, and you could be super transparent about what numbers you're using and where they came from, and is it from another study, is it from like something even like you kind of made up or you got from a survey of insurance agents, I don't know, something like that. But if they're not 100% transparent about where the numbers are coming from, then that always makes me lose sleep.
Yeah,
Does that help?
that's some really great points. Thank you. I don't think that's controversial at all, right? It's like
Well, I mean, the $100,000 that I threw out there was not. Maybe
uh,
if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about.
uh-huh. If you know, you know. Great. I believe we have time for one or two more quick questions. So don't be shy, anyone. I can also ask a question if nobody raises their hand, but I also wanted to present this slide for anyone that's interested in providing us with some feedback. We'd love to know what you thought about this webinar and how we can improve or what we should do more of. So thank you in advance for those of you who are willing to do so.
So one
Okay.
other thing I would add about effect sizes before I forget, since you did say statistical significance as well, sometimes we have really big confidence intervals around our estimates, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just what our power ended up being, and we can still learn a lot from that. So saying the effect sizes you can rule out is sometimes as valuable as saying, like, here's my point estimate that is statistically different from zero. Like, I can rule out big negative effects is sometimes important for things that we're worried about having unintended consequences with.
Great. I'm trying to see if maybe I should ask the quicker question here. I don't even know if either one of these questions are pretty quick, but what responsibility do you feel, Carly, is on the researchers to have a hand in the translational aspects of their work, especially when they utilize complex quantitative models, and the outcomes of their empirical research are used to assist consumers in financial education? I know you touched a little bit on this before. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on how much of an impact you want to have, right? If you are a young researcher who is getting tenure in your own discipline and you have your head down and you just don't have time, then you're probably not at this webinar. But it's not necessarily in your best interest. But then people aren't going to read your papers as much. They're not going to get cited as much. Policymakers aren't going to be looking at your work. And that's a huge trade-off. Right. So there are a lot of academics out there that never engage with practitioners. They get calls, they don't answer them. They get called by the media and they don't answer. And that's totally up to them. But I'm guessing if you guys are here, you're at least somewhat interested in that. And I think if you want to have an impact, not only should you be doing, writing good papers in a way that others can understand, you should also be writing a policy brief. Or some type of issue brief that is just for lay audiences, that has those key graphics, that has nothing extra, so that they don't have to do as much work, right? So I'm a huge fan of that stuff. I'm also at a land-grant university that very much values that, so it's a little bit easier for me than maybe some others. But if you want your work to have policy relevance and impact and cross-field impact, I think you just need to make your work accessible.
Wonderful. Well, that's all the time that we had for today. So I want to thank you all, especially Dr. Carly Urban, for your time. Please feel free to reach out and keep in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you, and we hope you have a wonderful day and hope to see you at the summit later this year. Thank you all.
Thank you.